never imagined that hunger would return to my life at this age. After raising 3 children and surviving years of hardship, I thought my final days would be peaceful, surrounded by family, laughter, and warm meals. But when my son insisted that I move in with him and his wife, I didn't know that peace would be replaced by quiet suffering. At first, everything seemed fine. My daughter-in-law smiled sweetly, saying I was part of the family now. She served me small portions and said she didn't want me to overeat at my age. I believed her. I was grateful. But soon the plates got smaller, and the excuses got bigger. She started locking the refrigerator at night. If I woke up hungry, I would find only a cup of water. When my son wasn't home, she'd whisper things that cut deeper than hunger itself. Things like, "You already lived your life. Let us live ours." I never told him. I didn't want to cause trouble. I would wait until she went out to sneak a piece of bread. Sometimes stale, sometimes moldy. I'd cry silently so my son wouldn't see my weakness. He worked long hours and trusted her completely. I couldn't bear to destroy that illusion. One afternoon I fainted in the kitchen. When I opened my eyes I saw fear. Not in her, but in him. For the first time he saw the truth. And that was the day everything changed. When I fainted that day, it wasn't because of the heat or my age. It was because I hadn't eaten in almost 2 days. My son's face turned pale when he realized that his own mother, the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise him, had been starving under his own roof. I wish I could say that things got better immediately. But life doesn't heal that easily. This is not a story of revenge or hate. It's a story of silence, pride, and the cruel ways love can blind us. I had always been a strong woman. I worked, cooked, cleaned, and made sure my children never went to bed hungry. I endured storms that would have broken others. So when my son offered to take care of me, I thought it was God's way of giving me rest after years of struggle. I didn't know that moving in with him and his wife would take away the little dignity I had left. I want to tell my story not for pity, but for awareness. There are thousands of elderly people who live in houses full of noise, but die slowly in silence. They're ignored, manipulated, or made to feel like burdens. I was one of them. But I also learned something powerful, that even the smallest voice can one day be heard. If you're watching this video right now, please don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. Maybe you'll see a bit of your own story reflected in mine. And if you've ever felt invisible, I want you to know, you're not alone. When my son Daniel told me he wanted me to move in with him, I was touched. He said, "Mom, you've done enough. It's time for us to take care of you." His wife, Lauren, smiled beside him, her arm wrapped around his. She nodded sweetly and said, "You'll love it with us." I wanted to believe her. After years of living alone, it felt like a blessing, a chance to be part of a family again. The first few weeks were fine. They gave me a small room at the end of the hallway, with a single bed and a little window that faced the garden. I decorated it with the few things I had left. An old photo of my late husband, a vase with fake flowers, and my worn-out Bible. I felt grateful, even for the smallest things. Lauren was polite in the beginning. She'd ask me how I liked my breakfast, or if I needed anything from the market. But soon, her kindness started to fade. She began sighing whenever I entered the kitchen, as if my presence made the air heavier. Once I heard her whisper to Daniel, "Your mom doesn't have to eat every meal with us. She's not a child." I pretended not to hear. But her words sank deep. I tried to make myself useful. I cleaned, folded laundry, cooked small dishes. I didn't want to be a burden. One evening I made a chicken stew the way Daniel loved it when he was little. He said it tasted like home. But when he left for work the next morning, Lauren threw the leftovers away right in front of me. "We don't need old food sitting around," she said flatly. My heart broke a little more that day. Days passed, and I noticed the portions on my plate shrinking. "You eat so little, Mom," Daniel said, smiling. I nodded and forced a smile back. He didn't know that after he went to bed, I'd lie awake listening to my stomach growl. I didn't want to embarrass him or make him choose between me and his wife. The house was always filled with food. The smell of roasted meat, fresh bread, butter melting on toast. But when I entered the kitchen, Lauren would quickly close the fridge or cover the dishes. "We're saving leftovers," she'd say. I started keeping a small jar of crackers under my bed, hidden beneath the blanket. Some nights, that was all I had. One morning I tried to make myself a cup of tea. As I opened the cupboard, Lauren appeared behind me. "Those are Daniel's tea bags," she said coldly. "You can have water." I nodded quietly, pretending not to mind, but my hands were trembling. The steam from the kettle blurred my eyes. Or maybe it was the tears I refused to let fall. I found peace only in small things. Watering the plants in the backyard. Sitting by the window and watching the sunrise. Remembering the days when my children were little. When the house was full of laughter and chaos. Back then, love meant sharing everything. Food, warmth, even dreams. Now I lived among people, yet I'd never felt lonelier. One afternoon, Daniel came home early and asked why I looked pale. Before I could answer, Lauren said quickly, "She's fine. She just doesn't eat much these days." I forced a smile and nodded, though my hands were shaking. He kissed my forehead and went to shower. The moment he left, she turned to me and said, "Don't make him worry. He works too hard." That night, I went to bed with an empty stomach, but the silence inside me was louder than hunger. Something told me that soon, she would go too far. And when she did, the truth would finally come out. I just didn't know that the price of that truth would be my own body giving up. The mornings became the hardest part of the day. My body felt weaker, my hands colder. Sometimes I'd wake up dizzy, my stomach tight and empty. I tried to drink water to quiet the hunger, but it only made me feel sicker. The mirror in my room showed a woman I barely recognized. Thinner, older, her eyes sunken and tired. But I still told myself, it's okay. Daniel will notice soon. He didn't. He'd rush to work before sunrise and come home late at night. Every time he walked through the door, I'd force a smile, hiding my shaking hands behind my back. "I'm fine, son," I'd say, even when I could barely stand. I didn't want him to think his home was a place of sadness. Lauren, on the other hand, grew colder by the day. She stopped pretending to be polite. If I sat at the table, she'd sigh loudly. If I used a plate, she'd wash it immediately, as if my touch made it dirty. She told Daniel I was forgetful, and that I'd eaten earlier, so he wouldn't notice when I went without dinner. She lied so easily that sometimes I started doubting my own memory. Once I tried to make toast for myself. She caught me spreading butter and said sharply, "That's for Daniel's breakfast. Don't waste it." Her voice was calm but cruel. I put the knife down, my heart pounding. I whispered, "I'm sorry." Though I had nothing to be sorry for. Nights were the worst. I'd hear their laughter from the living room while I lay in the dark, my stomach twisting. I'd close my eyes and remember the times I used to cook for him. Big meals, full of love and warmth. Back then, he'd hug me after every dinner and say, "You're the best cook in the world, Mom." Now the same son lived under the same roof, but we were strangers separated by silence. One day, Lauren went shopping and forgot to lock the fridge. I saw a small bowl of soup on the shelf. Cold, half full, maybe hers. My body moved before I could think. I took it, sat on the floor and ate it quietly, trembling like a thief. I cried after every spoonful, ashamed but desperate. It was the best thing I'd tasted in weeks. When Daniel came home that night, I wanted to tell him. My lips parted, but the words refused to leave. He looked so tired. I couldn't burden him. Instead, I just said, "I missed you today." He smiled, kissed my forehead and said, "You're my rock, Mom." I wanted to tell him that even rocks can crumble. The next morning, Lauren confronted me. "Did you touch my soup?" she asked, her voice like ice. I froze. She didn't wait for an answer. "You think I don't see what you do? You sneak around like some stray cat. You should be grateful we took you in." I tried to explain, but my voice broke. For the first time, she raised her hand. Not to hit me, but to warn me. Don't test me again. That night, I prayed. I begged God for strength, not just for my body, but for my heart. I asked him to open my son's eyes before it was too late. I didn't know how much longer I could keep living like a shadow in my own family. A week later, I collapsed in the hallway. I remember the sound of the plate shattering as I fell. Then darkness. When I opened my eyes, I was on the floor, Daniel's hands shaking me, his voice breaking as he called my name. And behind him, Lauren stood frozen, pale and silent, for once with nothing left to say. When I woke up, the room was bright and smelled like antiseptic. The rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor echoed softly beside me. I blinked, trying to understand where I was. A nurse smiled gently and said, "You're safe now, dear. You fainted from exhaustion." Her words struck harder than I expected. Exhaustion. That was the word they used instead of starvation. Daniel sat in a chair near the bed, his head in his hands. He looked older, broken. When he saw me awake, he rushed to my side. "Mom, what happened?" His voice trembled. I wanted to protect him even then. "I'm fine," I whispered. "Just tired." But the nurse's expression changed. She handed him a clipboard. "She hasn't been eating properly for weeks. Her body's extremely weak." I watched Daniel's face pale as he read the report. His eyes darted between me and the nurse. "Not eating?" he asked softly. I tried to speak, but he turned toward the door. "Where's Lauren?" The nurse said she'd left earlier. He nodded silently, and for a moment, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Anger. Later that evening, he returned home alone. I don't know what happened inside that house, but I imagined the storm that must have erupted. I pictured Lauren denying everything, saying I refused to eat, or that I was sick. Maybe she even cried. She was good at pretending. But Daniel wasn't the same man who once believed every word she said. When he came back to the hospital that night, his eyes were red. He didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he said, "Mom, I'm sorry." I reached for his hand. "You have nothing to apologize for," I whispered. But he shook his head. "I should have seen it. You lost so much weight and I trusted her." His voice broke, and for the first time I saw my son cry. The next few days were quiet. The nurses were kind, and they brought me warm meals. Real food, soft and simple. I savored every bite, not just for the taste, but for the dignity it gave me. Daniel came every morning, bringing flowers and sitting beside me in silence. Sometimes silence can hurt, but this one healed. It was filled with love, not shame. One afternoon, Lauren appeared at the hospital. Her hair was messy, her eyes swollen. She carried a plastic bag with fruit and juice. "I came to visit," she said softly. I could feel Daniel tense beside me. "Mom, do you want to see her?" he asked. I nodded slowly. He left the room, giving us space. She stood there for a long time without speaking. Finally, she whispered, "I didn't mean for it to go that far." Her voice was fragile, like she was talking to herself. "I was just tired. Money was tight. I thought if I controlled things, it would help." I looked at her and said nothing. What words could possibly excuse hunger? What reason could justify cruelty? She began to cry. "I'm sorry," she said. But her apology felt hollow. Still, I looked at her and said the only thing that came from my heart. "I forgive you." Not because she deserved it, but because I needed peace. Carrying hate would only starve what little soul I had left. When she left, Daniel returned. He took my hand gently and said, "You're coming home with me, but to a new home. Just you and me this time." I smiled faintly, tears filling my eyes. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen, fed, and loved. The silence that once suffocated me now felt like rest. The first morning after I left the hospital, the air felt different. Daniel had moved us into a small apartment on the edge of town. Quiet, filled with sunlight, and surrounded by trees. "It's not much," he said shyly, as if he needed to apologize. But to me, it was everything. The walls smelled like hope, and the silence no longer hurt. He insisted on cooking breakfast that day. I sat at the table, watching him burn the toast and laughed nervously. "Guess I didn't inherit your skills, huh?" he said. I smiled, truly smiled, for the first time in months. The eggs were overcooked, the coffee too bitter. But it was the best meal I'd ever had because it was made with love. My body was weak, but my spirit was waking up. Each bite, each step, each sunrise felt like a small victory. Sometimes Daniel would catch me crying quietly and ask, "Are you in pain?" I'd shake my head and say, "No, son, I'm healing." Because healing isn't only about the body. It's about forgiving the past without forgetting it. He began working from home more often, saying he wanted to spend time with me. I knew it was guilt that brought him closer, but I didn't mind. I'd rather have him near out of guilt than far away out of ignorance. Over time, guilt turned into care, and care turned into something stronger. A quiet devotion that words can't describe. One afternoon, I sat by the window watching the rain. Daniel brought me tea and said, I keep thinking about everything you went through. How did you forgive her? I took a sip and said, because I had to. Hate feeds on the same hunger that nearly killed me. I wanted to be free. He looked down, his eyes shining. You're stronger than anyone I know, he whispered. We started rebuilding small things. Our meals, our routines, our bond. On Sundays we cooked together. On Fridays we watched old movies. Sometimes we didn't speak for hours, just shared silence, the kind that felt warm instead of cold. It's strange how peace can live in the same spaces where pain once did. A few months later, Lauren sent a letter. I recognized her handwriting immediately. Careful, neat, controlled. She wrote that she'd gone back to her mother's house, that she was in therapy, and that she regretted everything. She didn't ask for forgiveness this time. She just said, I hope you're eating well. I folded the letter and put it in my Bible. Some wounds don't need to be reopened. As my strength returned, I began volunteering at a local shelter. Many of the people there were elderly, forgotten, ignored, living on what little kindness the world still offered. I told them my story, not to make them sad, but to remind them that survival doesn't always mean fighting. Sometimes it means enduring quietly until someone finally listens. Daniel would pick me up after every shift. He'd bring fresh bread or flowers and say, You look happy, Mom. And I was. Happiness isn't loud. Sometimes it's just a steady heartbeat, a full plate, and someone who truly sees you. I had all of that now. That night, as I sat at the table finishing dinner, I looked at my son. His face soft, his eyes gentle. I whispered, Thank you for saving me. He smiled and said, You saved me first. I realized then that love doesn't disappear. It just hides until we learn to feed it again. Months passed, and my life slowly found rhythm again. I learned to cook for 2 instead of 1, to smile without forcing it, to sleep without fear of being woken by hunger. But the memories still visited me at night. The locked fridge, the empty plates, the quiet humiliation. They were ghosts that refused to leave. Yet I no longer feared them. I welcomed them as reminders of where I'd been and how far I'd come. Every morning I'd wake up early to watch the sunrise. It became my ritual. I'd hold a warm cup of tea in my hands and whisper, Thank you, Lord, for another day. Because when you've been close to losing everything, even your dignity, every dawn feels like a miracle. One morning, as I sat in the park near our apartment, a young woman approached me. She said she had seen me at the shelter and wanted to talk. Her voice trembled when she told me that her own mother-in-law lived with her, and that she often lost her patience. Sometimes I feel she takes too much space, she confessed. I looked into her eyes and saw a younger version of Lauren. I told her my story. I didn't raise my voice or try to make her feel guilty. I simply said, When you take care of someone, you're not just feeding their body, you're feeding their soul. And one day, when you're old, you'll pray for someone to feed yours. She started crying softly. I never thought about it that way, she said. You just did, I replied, and smiled. That moment changed something in me. For the first time, I realized that my pain had a purpose. I couldn't undo the hunger I felt, but I could make sure others never felt it. I began speaking at the shelter more often, sharing my story with families, sons and daughters who needed to hear it. People cried, hugged me, thanked me, and I saw hope being born from my scars. Daniel was proud. He'd record my talks and post them online, saying, Mom, your story can help the world. I laughed at the idea, but secretly I liked it. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was a voice, a testimony, proof that even the quietest suffering can echo loud enough to change hearts. One day, after a long afternoon at the shelter, Daniel took me to a small cafe. He handed me a piece of paper, a printed article. They published your story, he said with a smile. I read the headline, The Woman Who Forgave Hunger. Tears blurred the words, but I didn't need to read further. For the first time in years, I felt full. Not with food, but with meaning. That night, I sat by the window again. The same way I used to when. That night, I sat by the window again. The same way I used to when I felt alone. Only this time, the house was filled with light and laughter. Daniel was cooking dinner. Badly as always. But I didn't correct him. I just watched, smiling. The smell of garlic and onions filled the air, and for a moment, I thought about all the years I'd spent cooking for others, never realizing how sacred that simple act truly was. As we ate, Daniel said, "You know, Mom, you could have hated her forever. No one would blame you." I looked at him and replied, "Hate would have kept me hungry, son. Forgiveness fed me when food couldn't." He reached across the table and held my hand. "I love you," he said quietly. I squeezed his fingers and whispered, "And I love you. More than words, more than years, more than pain." That night, before I went to bed, I wrote something in my old notebook. Sometimes God lets us go hungry, not to punish us, but to remind us that love is the only thing that truly fills us. I closed the notebook and felt peace settle over me like a blanket. I wasn't the same woman who had walked into that house months ago, weak and voiceless. I was someone reborn from silence, a woman who learned that even in starvation, the soul can be fed by forgiveness. And for the first time in a long, long while, I didn't fall asleep hungry. That night I sat by the window again, the same way I used to when I felt alone. Only this time the house was filled with light and laughter. Daniel was cooking dinner. Badly, as always. But I didn't correct him. I just watched, smiling. The smell of garlic and onions filled the air, and for a moment, I thought about all the years I'd spent cooking for others, never realizing how sacred that simple act truly was. As we ate, Daniel said, "You know, Mom, you could have hated her forever. No one would blame you." I looked at him and replied, "Hate would have kept me hungry, son. Forgiveness fed me when food couldn't." He reached across the table and held my hand. "I love you," he said quietly. I squeezed his fingers and whispered, "And I love you. More than words, more than years, more than pain." That night, before I went to bed, I wrote something in my old notebook. Sometimes God lets us go hungry, not to punish us, but to remind us that love is the only thing that truly fills us. I closed the notebook and felt peace settle over me like a blanket. I wasn't the same woman who had walked into that house months ago, weak and voiceless. I was someone reborn from silence. A woman who learned that even in starvation, the soul can be fed by forgiveness. And for the first time in a long, long while, I didn't fall asleep hungry. Sometimes the cruelest hunger isn't in the stomach. It's in the heart. It's the hunger for kindness, for being seen, for being treated with dignity. I learned that a plate of food can save the body, but only love can save the soul. I used to think growing old meant becoming invisible. But now I know, every wrinkle carries a story, and every story deserves to be heard. If you're watching this and you still have your parents or grandparents with you, look at them closely. Ask if they've eaten. Sit beside them, even in silence, because one day it will be your turn to crave not food, but the warmth of someone who truly cares. Don't wait until it's too late to give what costs nothing. Love, respect, and time. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched your heart, please subscribe, leave a like, and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want this story to reach every home where someone feels forgotten, so they remember that even in the darkest moments, love can still feed what hunger tried to destroy.